When we make a painting, we really want to control the media in order to get the outcome that we're after. But to make your work really expressive, you kind of need to lose control. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I start with a lot of control and then gradually lose control to create a more expressive painting. So I'm using the stencils here to create shapes, and having created a really strong value contrast between light and dark, I'm sort of disrupting those original shapes by adding in other colours. So I'm bringing in a sort of a mid-value blue and then a light yellow. And now I'm using a pencil to just loosely run around the edges of some of those shapes. I want to bring in some line. And what I'm doing here is just creating an interesting surface to work on. I'm leaving it purely by chance to see what sort of shapes emerge at the end of this. I'm veiling strong contrasts with this light coloured paint so that I can see through it as I start to build up the layers. So I've softened a lot of those edges, and I've created some depth as I've built up those layers. And you can see in these details that you can look through the paint to see the shapes underneath and the lines. And I can leave some areas where there are strong contrasts, and I can create other areas where it's light and I can work over the top of. So now I've got a really light surface, and I can add some dark colour values over the top. And the way I do this is I add the paint and then I shift it. Now it's all in the way you hold the brush. So look at how I'm holding the brush. I'm holding it right down towards the end, and I'm being really loose with it. I'm rolling it across the page. I'm allowing the accident to happen. Look at where I'm holding it now, right at the end of the handle, at the very tip. And by holding it here, I have less control of it. So the marks that I'm making are more like accidents. But I am being quite intentional about where I'm putting the brush. And if I don't like a certain mark, I can come over it with the colour shaper and just move the paint around. Adding water to the surface helps to move the paint, helps to loosen it up. And then I can use other tools to sort of dig into thicker areas and create lines and scratchy marks as well. Now, having put a dark colour over light, I'm going to put a light colour over dark. And I can create edges, and these edges can be very subtle or they can be quite strong, depending on where I put that edge. If it's dark on light, then it'll be a strong edge. If it's dark on dark, it'll be subtle. Having put down wet paint, there's a wonderful opportunity to then shift the paint around with a tool to create sort of accidental marks, to lose control and just experiment and explore and see what happens. While you're doing this though, you can also be thinking about what sort of shapes you're creating and whether you're creating a balance in the composition. So having put that strong dark shape on the right, I'm trying to balance that with the same depth and value coming in on the left hand side. I love combining wet and dry media in the same painting. So having put on a lot of paint, now I'm coming in with a pencil. And I'm just really using this pencil very loosely, even though I am using a stencil to sort of guide that pencil. I'm really just drawing within the shapes and not necessarily hugging the edge either. I'm using the stencil to kind of disrupt the natural flow of the line. And having used the pencil, now I can move to wet media again and come in over the top of the pencil. And this just builds up that lovely layering where you can look through paint and see drawing underneath. Now I'm having a bit more control here and creating shapes by bringing in some dark paint over the top of the light. So while there's lots of accidental marks and the appearance of a lack of control on the surface, it's nice to have a few little bits that actually do look like they are controlled, because that's an opposite, that's a difference. And so with this really light paint, I'm starting to create some subtle edges and some marks that show some control and connection between shapes. So having created a surface that's full of lovely loose marks and textures and depth of layers being built up, now I'm coming in with a loose brush. Look how lightly I'm holding that brush and just dragging it across the page. I'm allowing for accidents to happen. It's kind of like controlling the accident. And it's alternating from using the media with control and then using it without control, or much less control. Once again, putting the paint on and then a little bit of water and then moving it around, shifting that paint around with the colour shaper. And while I'm adding these darks, I'm keeping an eye on the whole design of the composition, where my lights and darks are and how I'm leading the eye around the composition by using those strong contrasts. So at this point of the painting, I'm deciding what I want to be dominant. So having made that light shape, I'm pushing back the yellow shape above it by drawing over it with a pencil. And look how I'm holding that pencil. I'm just being really loose with it, not losing control, not allowing myself to get too tight. So putting the paint on and then shifting it with a tool that sort of takes away that tight control that you can have. So here I found a little shape that I like, so very intentionally I'm bringing some darker paint over the top of it. And now I'm using a pastel, so moving from wet paint to dry media again, and I'm using that without control, and now bringing some paint over it and smudging it with that colour shaper and moving that paint around to distributing that colour through the composition. Rolling a bit of paint on with the edge of the brush, shifting it with a rag, dragging a bit of heavier paint and drawing through with the end of the brush, always creating marks, putting paint on and then shifting it. And up here I'm being a lot more intentional in terms of the shape that I want to create there. I'm creating differences in design. And so this is the final piece. There's lots of expressive mark making, and yet there's a control in the design and the distribution of shapes and lights and darks. And coming in close, you can see those layers built up. Transparent paint, opaque paint, dry media, wet media. This all adds interest to the surface of the painting and allows for a more expressive outcome in the end. I really like this way of painting, and I seem to be getting looser and looser, and I'm loving this accidental mark more and more in my work.